So we're going to talk about international payment addressing. And by a show of hands, how many of you can tell me your account number? 1, 2, 3, 4. About half a dozen, maybe 10 at the most. And this is a room of payment geeks. Now, by a show of hands, how many of you can tell me your mobile number? Yeah, I think that was almost everyone. So, using a proxy, so as I just demonstrated, for people to find their account information is really cumbersome. You have to go on a treasure hunt to really find it, especially when it comes to international payments, because you need more information than you would otherwise need for a domestic payment. So the World Bank's definition of a proxy identifier or alias is a link between a payer or a payee's transaction account information with a short identifier that is easy to remember, allowing the public and the business sector to transact in a seamless manner without needing to know and input the beneficiary's bank account details. So that means a proxy or an alias could be memorable, from a mobile number to email address, a tax ID, or even it could be a made-up number if you want to protect your privacy. So proxies are fundamentally easy to remember and easy to share. And typically they are things senders already know, like a mobile phone number. So here we just sort of demonstrate how the two get linked. And there are two ways this can be done. Either the proxy, which is broken into two parts, the identifier and the DFSP, or the account details. So in some cases, like UPI in India, it's linked to the DFSP. And the DFSP knows what to do with when it receives the proxy. It knows which account it needs to credit. In other cases, like the SEPA proxy lookup scheme, the IBAN is returned. So the IBAN is what's linked to the proxy, and that's what's returned. So proxies are popular for domestic payments. And we've seen the rise of UPI, PIX, and then mobile money for 15 years, a little bit more than that now. So 11 billion transactions per month on UPI, over 2 billion on PIX, and over 5 billion across all mobile money deployments use proxies to transact every month. So using proxies for cross-border payments is really the next step here. And when we send emails to each other, I don't need to know your email service provider, your internet service provider, whether you're receiving it on Gmail or Outlook or on a mobile or desktop. But when it comes to sending money across borders, you need the equivalent of all of these pieces of information, most of which is public. So the sending institution really should be able to find the recipient within the receiving entities, utilizing a simple identifier. And now I'll hand over to our resident philosopher, Michael Richards.
Thanks, Arunjay. So what are we going to propose here? We're going to propose essentially two things. First of all, a generalized way for people to get access to a service that identifies people and associates them with the accounts, with the institutions that hold their accounts. And second, a way of connecting those information providers together such that someone can query across a whole range of of directory institutions. Now, what we are also doing here is splitting the directory information from the payment system. Now, if you look at a system like Motorloop today, the addressing system is intimately bound up with the payment system. If you want to find out which institution holds a particular identifier's account, then you do that by using a payment system API. There isn't any way independently of saying, oh, by the way, do you know who holds Mike's account? So what we want to do, I mean, sorry, this is not to say that all directory systems in the world are like that. There are directory systems in the world which are used by payment systems, which are not themselves part of the payment systems. And one of the other things that we would like to be able to do is to treat those directory systems in the same way as the directory systems which are embedded in payment systems. So we start with the idea of a proxy lookup service operator. And that's a system that external institutions, queriers, use to store proxies or aliases and to resolve proxy queries to the DFSP or to the account details. It's essentially a directory in the sense we have it at the moment. So it's a proxy for a directory. It provides a standard interface for querying directories of different underlying types. In my search for memes, I was going to have a bunch of minions here. They all kind of look like each other. Underneath, they're sort of different, but externally, you've just got a big crowd of minions. It will also add zero knowledge proof functionality for directories which don't have it. Hands up anyone who doesn't know what zero knowledge proof is? Everybody knows what zero knowledge proof is. That's great. I can tell I am among friends. However, not all directory systems today support zero knowledge proof access. So the PLSO can add that functionality for systems that don't already have it. So it behaves like a zero knowledge proof directory, even though the underlying directory does not work like that. And that means that even where directories will just throw out vast amounts of personal identifying information, if you just tickle them in the right place, the PLSO makes sure that that doesn't happen and that everything is properly guarded and this information is not hurtling around the internet to anybody who asks. It also resolves queries to payment systems as well as to account holding systems. Now, when we look at what the world might be like in a few years' time, we will have many more connections between individual institutions. And it's the case today, for instance, that a European bank or indeed an African bank may belong to more than one payment system. Now, if I'm trying to find an account that's held by a particular institution, I'm interested in the institution, but what I'm actually interested in is institutions that belong to a payment system that I also belong to. And therefore, an institution that belongs to a payment system that I can pay someone through. So that is also becoming a variable. It's simply assumed at the moment that when I look for somebody's address, I will always be looking to pay them in the payment system that we both belong to. We've kicked that prop away. Now we can have multiple payment systems. We can have institutions that belong to more than one payment systems and payment system. And what we're looking for is an institution that belongs to a payment system that I also belong to. And it also provides a way of timestamping information so that a regulator can also see which set of compliance information was used to support a particular payment. Now, obviously, compliance information changes over time. People change their names, they change their phone numbers, all of that kind of thing. So we need to make sure that we have some way for a regulator to say, when you approve that payment, what was the compliance information that caused you to approve it? And again, not all directory systems currently have that ability, but they need to have it, And they need to have it in the same way so that we can support proper regulation of payments. Now, the next thing is we want to have PLSOs which can be connected to each other. Connecting them into a unified service means that users can look for proxies across a wide address space. And the analogy that we're using here is something like DNS, where the directory PLSOs are exchanging information with each other about who's on the network. They're connected via a thing that we call a proxy addressing system service, PAS. And that can return results for the beneficiary's account and also for the payment systems that can be used to reach that account. Now, the PLSO typically will contain information about the payment systems that it works for. So now we can get back information for the different payment systems that can be used to reach that account. And it abstracts the identification of beneficiaries from the functionality of a particular payment system. It means that payment systems and non-payment system directories can function in the same space as each other, and you can get information back from a non-payment system directory, which is just as useful and valuable as the information you would get from a payment system directory. Which is what I just said. Okay, so the principles of using a proxy for cross-border payments are: we use zero-knowledge proof, so people tell us what they know, and we tell them whether that relates to a person who is legal or discoverable or not. No personal identifying information is stored anywhere in the system. Again, that's a consequence of the zero-knowledge proof. We don't need to pass PII round the system because the other people in the system are not going to be evaluating for themselves that information, and therefore they're not going to have the problems associated with storing that information, keeping it private, keeping it up to date, deleting it when people say, all of those kinds of things. There will be a records audit trail, and it will remain the source of truth. It will be able to say, I evaluated this request, and this was the response that I got. A sending PSP will send probably the full name, proxy, a country, and typically the payment systems it belongs to. It may also send additional information that might be used in CFT evaluation, for instance, those sorts of things. But the point is, it sends the information that it knows. It gets something back that basically says whether a name is a match or a partial match or no match. Typically, this will be a probability value between 0 and 1. Which payment systems it matches, and the receiving RSP's identifier, which will be a way of saying, if you want to use this payment system, this is the identifier that the DFSP goes under in this payment system, because it's perfectly possible that in different payment systems, the same DFSP will have a different identifying code. So we need to be able to associate, if we return multiple payment systems, for each payment system, we need to return the identifier which that DFSP uses in that payment system. So this is what the transaction flow looks like. Sender sends to the PSP. It goes to the PAS directory, which looks across all of its connected proxy directories and returns the information to the sender PSP. The sender now knows, hopefully, that it can send to this proxy if it sends to this DFSP in this payment system. So from that point onwards, it can execute the payment in the payment system as it normally would. There are, of course, challenges with this. Duplicates is the most obvious one. I'm going to suggest, actually, that one of the things that we might have a work stream about in the next PI is finally to grasp the nettle of duplicates and see if we can figure out a solution to it. But the sorts of things that might happen is multiple PLSOs, multiple directories respond, but they all point to the same DFSP. It might also be that multiple PLSOs respond with different DFSPs because the same identifier relates to an account at different institutions. It might also be that PLSOs respond with different destinations, but with different levels of confidence. So one of them says, yes, I match this completely. The other one says, yeah, possibly. So I just would say we should be careful that we are not, we should be careful to emphasize that we are not solving all of the problems. And one of the problems that we're not solving is the duplicate problem. That's still in the same place it was. Okay, I'm now going to hand over to Arunjay, who will talk about the compliance history.
Thanks, Michael. So once we can use a proxy cross-border, it becomes an identifier. And combining that with the compliance information can create a compliance history. So today, when we transact, it's as though each of us are transacting for the first time from a compliance point of view. There isn't like this history of having transacted. So if we were to think of this as an eBay rating, I mean, most of us would have bought something or the other on eBay. And the first thing we do is check the seller's rating to see how reliable the seller is. In the same vein, creating a compliance history against a proxy will give institutions a greater weight against that proxy. So, for example, the BIS's project Mandala is looking specifically into this. The use case, I mean, doesn't currently connect proxies, but we're proposing that suppose you were to connect the two, you could create this compliance history. So the pre-validation is the first step, where before a transaction happens, the two DFSPs can validate that the account exists, that there's a match, the name matches, and also perform KYC, so and AML and all of the compliance. So that means that without any transaction happening, without the money going anywhere, you've received this proof that's generated from the proof engine, and then that goes along with the transaction. In this case, it's asset transfer, so it could be a payment, or it could be a digital asset, or anything. And the idea is that you have much more certainty and you have finality as a result of it, because it's not like today where you fire the payment and hope for the best. And if it doesn't clear some of the sanction checks and whatnot, then the payment comes back. And as Michael was talking about earlier, the reconciliation and all of those sort of problems that you end up with. So this is sort of the next phase, and just to paint the possibilities that can come from using proxies. And then, so in summary, really a proxy allows users to use an easy to remember identifier. It reduces barrier to adoption of digital remittances because it becomes much easier to send and receive payments. And then it enables proxies across different payment systems, payment networks. And if you'd like to know more about the potential of proxies, visit nextbillion.net. On the homepage, the first article is from proxy IDs to autonomous payments, why the future of financial services is hyper efficiency. Great. Any questions?
Sorry, can I just add one thing before we move to questions? what's underlying this, I think, is a movement away from the current assumption about how compliance information is passed about. If you look at standards like ISO 20022 or indeed like Mojaloop, they assume that compliance information will be sent from one participant to another and the participant will evaluate it. That has problems. The other way of doing this, which for instance is the way in which MOSIP does it, we've heard this talked about earlier, yesterday, is that you don't send any of the information, you send a token that says, here is where you could go to get the information verified. Now, that is I think certainly in Orunje's and my minds, a much more efficient and indeed private way of managing it. But there's going to be a need for standard systems in general to recognize that there are two different ways of representing compliance information. One is what I call representation by content, which is what we currently have. You pass the content around, and the other is representation by reference. Well, what you pass around is a reference that enables the recipient to go and get that information if they need it. So there's a piece of work to do there. And now I move to questions.
Elijah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael and RJ. So I think I relate to the problem that we're trying to address here. Whenever I do not know my bank account, so whenever I need to receive a payment, I have to go to the app and get it out. So the problem that you have, enlightened us about, I think, is it okay for me to liken it to the solution that domain names provides to IP addresses?
That's right.
Okay, so yeah, okay, so I'm also thinking we could, in the proxy alias, we could have information about the payment system, like the way, domain names have the top level domain, so you know which server to probably call. I don't know. That's something I was thinking just out of the box here.
Yeah, I think the problem that I would see with doing it that way is that it's information that the sender is quite unlikely to have.
Oh, yeah.
You see what I mean? So there's no reason that the sender should know which payment schemes their DFSP belongs to. I mean, they might be very interested the way, of course, we are, but not everybody has the good fortune to be like us. And I think probably you pass most people in the street and you say, so which payment systems does your bank belong to? Those.
Yeah, but it makes a lot of sense that this is a problem that we need to tackle. Thank you so much.
Okay. Anyhow. Joseph.
Thank you, Michael. I was hearing that the compliance information is passed through tokens, but I would like to learn more about the integration work at the background you have with fraud and risk management systems like Tazama. At the end of the day, we will all expect a complete payment platform. Thank you.
Hmm?
So how does
Sorry, can you repeat yourself?
What I want to know is the integration work that has been completed or that has been done with the fraud and risk management systems like Tazama.
Oh, yes, sorry, Tazama, like Tazama. I'm going to need to think about that one, but I understand your point. One thing that I would say is that the fraud and risk management systems like Tazama rest on the same sets of information about people as do the systems that we are talking about. We use them for a different purpose, though our purposes might also include compliance measuring in the same way as Tazama does. But I think one of the things that, I mean, again, I speak with the knowledge that there are people far more expert in Tazama in this room than am I. But one of the things I think that fraud and risk management system does is it enables you to look across all sorts of things other than simply the information about people to try and spot patterns of fraudulent use of systems and those kinds of things. So the question is not so much about, for a fraud and risk management system, it's not so much about the people, it's about what the people are doing. So I think there's at least a possibility that they could be complementary with each other.